Okay, let's just start and see how this goes. Okay, so I'm laying out my fabric. And since the front of the uniform is different from the back, I'm going to do each piece separately because I have to make 2 different patterns. So then I'm going to cut it out and leave a good 1/2 inch seam allowance around the whole thing to give me room to sew it together. So the front layer is about 1/2 inch bigger around the bust from the back. I did that on purpose because if I do them the same, your front is going to get really stretched out because of your boobies. I'm going to be sewing the shoulder seams together and both the sides together. I'm not adding a zipper or Velcro or anything on the sides. I want it to look very smooth, so I'm probably going to have to be slipping it over my head, so I'm leaving the bottom open. And because this material is stretchy, I will be using a zigzag stitch. So the width of my stitch is between 2 and 3, and the width as I sew of the zigzag is right at 3. So this is the bodysuit. It's started. I decided to do 2 layers. So I just did 2 of the exact same patterns, sewed together the sides and the tops, and put them together. So what I'm going to do is turn it inside out, and I'm going to sew the bottom half shut. So I sewed the bottom layers together, and you can see I have it pinned, so I'm ready to top stitch it. It's double layered. I put them right side out. You can see how my seams are on the outside right here. And I'm going to sew together the bottom around this, leave the sleeves and the hem up here unfinished. So I sewed the bottom half together and I turned it right side out already so the seams are facing each other. I pinned it together just so I know where to top stitch it. This fabric rolls really easily. And you can see it looks kind of puckered, just pinned. And it's going to look that way when I top stitch it. And you'll see that when it's stretched out over your body, it pulls straight and it's going to lay flush. Here's the pattern for the sleeve roll cuff thing. So you're going to need 2, 1 for each arm. And the Super Sailor Scouts, which is what I'm doing, the newer ones, they only have 2 rolls and then a layer of sheer kind of fabric that makes up the 3rd roll. The classic Sailor Scouts, they have 3 rolls. So just go 1, 2, 3 and make 3. You can use the same pattern, just adjust it for what version of the Sailor Scout you're doing. So since I'm doing the newer Super Sailor Scout, I pretty much sewed it in half and I left an opening and I'm going to stuff this side. So now I'm going to close the gap and make a second line, stitch, and then stuff the other second roll. Okay, now you have a completed stuffed sleeve cuff. So you see I've placed the breastplate thing over the leotard and I carefully pinned it into place. So the top breastplate, I folded the tops under and pinned it, and then the leotard is the bottom piece and I carefully folded those 2 pieces into each other and pinned them to the cuff roll. You can see mine were a little too long, so I just kind of tucked them into each other. So it really benefits to not stuff the bottoms too much. Like see, it was this part and I didn't even put stuffing in here. That's so when you have overlap, you can just bend them into each other. I always try it on so I know that the sleeve looks the way I want it. I really like it. Boom! The sleeves are nearly finished. In the Super Sailor Scouts, they have that last little layer. It's like a 2-3 inch of a sheer something. Don't know what it is. To me, the pictures look like they're of a pinkish hue. Mostly I've seen it done in a white, but I decided that I'm just gonna go with the light pink because I liked it. This is the pattern I traced for the extra see-through cuff on the bottom. I cut 2 pieces out of my sheer pink fabric and we're gonna sew it on the inside of the cuff right in here. The sheer material is slightly bigger than my cuff pattern, so that way you're gonna see it hanging below the cuff. Since we're only doing 1 layer, you're gonna have to hem this edge. I'm just gonna do a really tight zigzag stitch down the whole side. I'm using a light pink thread and the width of my zigzag is about at 5. And the width as I sew it is really fine. It's like below fine, it's almost at 0. It does kind of have this curliness to it. I don't mind that. If I had a serger, it probably wouldn't do that, but this is as good as I got with the zigzag stitch. I turned my bodysuit inside out. Now, I have a really old machine. It's like 7-8 years old. This is a lot of fabric to shove through it. I'm actually just gonna hand tack this layer into the inside of my sleeve, but if you feel free, go ahead and stuff that through your sewing machine. Moving on to the collar. Woo! I cut 2 layers, and before you even sew them together, take one layer, doesn't matter, your top layer, and we're going to stitch the little white lining that goes around the edge. Now the classic Sailor Scouts, they all actually have a different number of lines. Like Sailor Jupiter actually has 2, Sailor Moon has 2, others only have 1. It's different. Super Sailor Scouts, they all have 1 except for Sailor Moon, so that's a lot easier. So I got double fold bias tape. Remember when you're pinning on the edge of the bias tape, you need a little bit of green fabric to show on the edge, but also you need seam allowance room to sew the 2 pieces together. I'm pinning it about an inch, inch and a quarter away from the edge. When I get to the corner, I just fold it over on itself. Once you have it all pinned down, go ahead and sew it. There you can see the stitching. See how clean that looks? 1 on each edge. So go ahead and lay this flat. Take the other piece and put the right sides together, so the shiny sides together. Pin it and sew it together. It's a really good idea to put the side that you stitched the bias tape on top. That way, when you do your hem, you can keep track of the distance between the hem and the bias tape, make sure it's straight, and that way your tape is going to look straight when it lays on your collar. Now iron it and top stitch it really, really smoothly around the edge. Top stitch, very clean looking. Let's go ahead and attach it to our bodysuit. So taking the right side, the one with the bias tape on it, pin that into the inside of the bodysuit. Now see if these 2 edges stop the same point in the front of your bodysuit. It's going to look really funny if it doesn't. See our top stitch? It's green on this side, white on this side, yeah. Now go ahead and just flip your collar right side out. A very nice sailor collar. My front's a little messy. My collar was like 2 inches too short, 1 inch on this side to meet in the very middle. I'm kind of upset about that. There's not really much I can do because I'm out of fabric and this has to be done in 2 days, but whatever. I'm going to deal with it. I'm just going to put the bow over that, so it's going to work. This is the pattern for the hip roll that goes over the edge of the fuku. Remember to cut out 2. You need 1 for each side of your hip. The first thing you want to do with your hip rolls is sew the 2 V's together. So this is the front where you cut it at that little bit of an angle. You're going to lay them out together and sew the V's together. Make sure that is really smooth and nice looking before you start to stuff them. So what you're pretty much going to do is fold it in half and sew it along the edge. You have to leave about a 2-3 inch gap right in the middle because you're going to have to stuff it. So once you have the whole thing stuffed, go ahead and sew shut the 2 little openings. Now we're going to move on to the skirt. I research a lot of cosplays before I even start my own cosplay, and I kind of see what looks good, what doesn't, fabrics, looks, patterns, designs, everything. And so my opinion, what I'm going to do, which strays from the cartoon because they're drawn with pleated skirts, I'm actually going to make a circle skirt. Circle skirts are really wavy and they're actually cut out of a circle. That's why they kind of droop over and create really nice ruffles. Pleated skirts are a strip of fabric that is pleated. It's folded back and forth, and that's actually how the Sailor Scouts are drawn in the anime. So for my circle skirt, I pretty much cut out 4 of these patterns and each one is doubled. So this is a double and I cut out 4 of these. So the first step is just to make a big circle. Take each one and sew them together and just sew and sew and sew and sew until you have got one big circle of a skirt. You should end up with something about like this. I didn't have enough fabric to do the sides on the fold, so I did have to cut them apart and do them seams. But they're going to be in the edge, so you're really not going to see the seam. What's important is the one that was on the fold is going to be in the front and the back. Now we're going to start tapering the skirt so you get that V shape that they have on their waist. So 8 inches is going to be the length of the front of the skirt, but I'm pinning it at 9 inches to leave hem allowance room on the bottom. I'm leaving a 1 inch margin around the whole bottom to hem it. The sides I'm keeping this length, they are at 14 inches. The back of the skirt I'm going to leave a little longer than the front. I pinned it at 10 inches, so it's really going to be 9 inches. The 1 extra inch is to leave room for your butt, so your skirt doesn't go flying up and anyone can see your panties. We don't want that. Okay, so I've folded my skirt in half. This is the front line, this is the back. I put a little X with pins right here so I know that this is the front. So out of pins, I just kind of made a line of a slight curve going from the front of the skirt up to the hip. So this is the V I'm going to cut my skirt at. Once you have the shape of your skirt cut into your nice V shape, we're going to gather the whole thing. So I'm actually going to start at the back, going to start just a stay stitch, and then I'm going to gather it up. So to gather your fabric, you're going to want the width of your stitch really, really far apart so it's easier to gather. Before you start, make sure you have a bit of extra thread. That makes the gather easier to pull. The edge of my fabric is right at the edge of my foot, and to sew a stitch that's going to be gathered, just so. You don't ever knot it, so that way you can slip one of the threads through and you're going to gather your fabric. And here we find that pressing your seams is important. When you're going to do the gather stitch, make sure your seam is laying open flat. That way it'll be easier to gather and it's not going to snag and stop at every seam. I slipped my bodysuit on and I pinned on the sides and on the front and the back of where the hip roll needs to be. You're going to take your hip roll and you're going to pin on the spots that match the side seams of the hip. You're going to start pinning your skirt to the hip roll. To start off, pin the front V and the hips together where you know the hip of your skirt and the hip of your roll is. From then on out, just adjust your gathers and pin it accordingly along the front and the back. Okay, now you should have the whole thing pinned. It's pinned like this, both raw edges out on the top. Go ahead and just stitch them together so you don't have to worry about them falling apart when you sew this to your bodysuit. I did have extra in the back, I just kind of sewed it as best I could, and I'm going to tuck it into my Fuku and cut it off, but I'm going to deal with that afterwards just to make sure it fits before I cut anything off. So what I did was I'm pretty much holding my skirt inside out. It's got the rough edges up. I slipped my bodysuit inside of it and just started pinning it together. So I pinned the front in place and the sides in place just to make sure that they all match first, and then I'm going to pin in between. We're just going to sew the raw edges right down to the suit, and then it's going to lay over and you'll see the ruffle. Okay, it should be all one piece now. Woo! Okay, then after you've hemmed the skirt, it's done. Okay, the last thing I did was attach the bows. I put them on with Velcro so they come off. I just did a patch of Velcro here and a patch of Velcro here. Same with the one on the back. And the link for my tutorials on how I did my bows is going to be over here. So check that guy out if you want to see how I made these bows. The last thing I'm still finishing up is my resin casting, which I'm doing for the heart shape right here, the jewel and the star that goes on the necklace. Once I'm finished with those, I'm going to attach it down here so you can see how I made all the additional jewelry for my costume. I also have my crown tutorial on how I made the little crown piece out of Warbler. Thank you for sticking with me for this tutorial. I hope it was helpful to you. And check out my other ones, whatever, to see how I made the additional parts of my costume. So, hey, don't pull those out. And it's 1 o'clock. Woo! My gloves. I can't turn it off with my gloves on. Don't fall over. Oh man, disasters is happening. Get this off.